Anyway, the dwarves of Belagos, the Broadbeams, who invented steel on this side of the Great Sea, the Noldor invented it independently with the help of Owl himself in Valinor, gave the Ironfists and the other clans the secret of making steel, but the Ironfists never took to it, except in the specialized use of armor and weapons of war, and continued to make use of common old iron for most other things. Oh, and the Ironfists were the only clan to be given their name by their enemies rather than by other dwarves. For early on the Ironfists, who, as I said, take their abode in the Iron Hills in the northeast, had to endure attacks from roving bands of orcs, and even renegade demons and other evil creatures out of Utumno, who had fled that vile place when the Valar purged it in the War of the Powers. They before long started wearing cuirasses, greaves for legs and arms, and even gauntlets, all made of iron. It was these primitive iron gauntlets without fingers that made the orcs they fought come up with the name, it is said, and our brothers liked it so much they allowed it to stick. They also had that hobnailed, iron-capped boots of hardened leather which they used, and use to this day to stamp orcs and other enemies into the ground. The Ironfists are a hardy lot. Their skin is fair and often ruddy, their hair and beards are blonde, running the whole gamut from platinum to straw, and all kinds of red from ruby to sprightly fire. I've never seen one with black or brown hair, but plenty with grey and a handful with white. And it is said they grow grey quickly, but that very few ever have any flecks of snow. They braid both hair and beards, even more than the Firebeards. All in all, they're a simple folk, quick to anger, but also quicker to forgiveness than others of our race. Having said that they're quick to anger, I should stress again that it cools off quickly for them. And of all the clans, they are the ones least likely to risk their lives in war and strife, even for their kin. I guess having seen much more of it than most of our kin, perhaps with the exception of the Firebeards and Broadbeams during the War of the Jewels, they know more of what it's truly meant than the rest of us. Also, the Firebeards and Broadbeams experienced a few devastating battles in that war. The War of the Jewels was staggering numbers of dead and wounded on those few occasions, in a long history of mostly security and plenty, whereas the Ironfists have seen their numbers dwindle over millennia, in spite of their slightly more numerous women, picked off by raids and small incursions, and the greater risk of living closer to the surface. Now I'll tell ye about a clan most non-dwarves in these lands have never even heard of, and this holds true even for many dwarves in the clans I have so far mentioned. But in their own land they are revered, honoured, and even feared by those who come into contact with them. The Blacklocks. The Blacklocks, as the name implies, all have their black hair and beards, except for their elders, whose hair and beards start turning grey and then white much later than for most other dwarves, generally not before their 250s, and never until their 3rd century in life. They all sport very curly hair, which they very often braid into many plaits, both their beards and the long hair billowing from the tops of their heads. Their skin is brown and varies in colour, from that of hazelnuts to that of acorn. They stem from the Orocarli, the Red Mountains, far to the northeast. Very little news ever comes to the westlands of Middle-earth from the Orocarni, or that region in general, including from the dwarves there, especially to non-dwarves. But King Durin has sent emissaries to King Sarkad of the Blacklocks from time to time, and the two are on friendly terms. I once met a traveller from that land, and his appearance was just as had been described to me, as I have told you now. It took a long time for the craftsmen messengers of the Iron Hills and Belagost in the Blue Mountains to reach the Orocarni and discover it back in the First Age. And so the Blacklocks were the clan who had to wait the longest for the introduction of iron and then steel into their smithies. This did not bother them that much, since the Orocarni are rich in copper ore, whence the mountains got their name. They early on made armor from that material, and when they, before the travellers from the Ironfists and the Broadbeams had reached them, had come into contact with an Easterling tribe of men called the Balchoch. These Balchoch traded tin with them, which was plentiful in the brooks and rivulets of the Balchoch homeland. The smiths of the Blacklocks realized they could mix smelted tin and copper, and thus produce bronze. They made all manner of tools, utensils, weapons, and armor with this bronze, and even when iron and later steel had been introduced to them, they still continued to make many objects in this material, for they loved the hue and texture of the metal, in spite of iron and steel being superior. They now have very highly skilled iron and steel smiths, but the number of bronze and coppersmiths in the Orocarni is still greater than in any other land I know, whether populated by dwarves or the Akazad. The Blacklock, who had come here to Khazad-dûm as an emissary from King Sarkad to King Durin, was indeed clad in a helm and cuirass made entirely of bronze in their traditional style, with embossed dragon heads on both. Last, I will mention the last clan, the Stiffbeards. They are generally mentioned the last, not because of any lack of honor or other failing of their character, but simply because they live so far to the north in the frozen waste of Forachel that none save that tribe of men known as the Lossoth, the snow men of that region, have any contact with them. They come to the Stonefoots in the Grey Mountains, but rarely, and almost never here to Khazad-dûm. But now they have no king, and their father ancestor and all their ancestors are said to have awoken at the root of a mountain that went mostly underground in the furthest north of Middle-earth, and that freezing and afraid they emerged from an icy cave in that region many centuries later. Had Aule not given their ancestor father Ur the gift of fire, they would surely all have perished. Though all dwarves know how to work linen and wool into both fine clothing and beautiful embroideries, the Stiffbeards are said to have the best tailors and seamstresses among us. They also tan hides and work leather from the beasts in the far north, like sea lions. There are lions in the sea? Well, not exactly lions, more like big hulking sheep or fish the size of big horses, with smooth skin like a fish, but large tusks like those of orcs, but bigger, and their tusks protruding from their upper, not their lower jaws. And then there's seals. Now they're smaller, like a sheep, but with the same slippery, blubbery skin as the sea lions. Anyway, the Stiffbeards make all sorts of leather clothing and armor from these sea beasties, all sorts of woolen and even linen clothes when they get their hands on wool, and even linen trading with the Lossoth, who in turn get it trading with people further to the south, such as the Dunedain of Arnor. Skin like a fish, the size of a horse, and tusks like an orc? Well, don't get hung up about it. Anyway, the Stiffbeards don't have much by way of minerals, except what they get by trade from the south, and silver, yes lad, silver, which they say is as plentiful in those snow-drenched mountains and overflowing creeks in spring as there are nifradil flowers in Lothlorien. So the Stiffbeards make all manner of tools and drinking utensils in silver, and weapons too, like knives and spear tips, and the tips of harpoons, which they use to fish, and which is like a spear with many barbs along the edge, to make the fish stick once it's been speared. But given the silver is not so good for making mail or burnies, or cuirasses, or even helmets, although I have heard that deep elves have mastered the art of making helmets out of silver, perhaps using magic, and given that most evil creatures like orcs and trolls, other than snow trolls, shun the frostbitten land the Stiffbeards call home, they have little need for arms and armour anyway. Many tools and weapons, especially for hunting, they make out of the bones of the creatures they use for their leather. Unlike the Lossoth, however, they never stay in the same place longer than a year, 'tis said. The Stiffbeards are not as nomadic, so that even though they make their abodes called igloos out of blocks of ice, as do the Lossoth, they make them permanent by use of magic, and they even heat them up with magical blue fires that warm our kin but do not melt the edifices. They have a large city built in this manner in the furthermost north called Frostholm, and in this they dwell and make their lives. The blue fires even heat their furnaces, which melt their silver, and the floors are strong enough to stand the hammering of the metal on huge silver anvils that are also imbued with magic to prevent them from breaking. Well, there they dwell, and there they hunt, and there they make their leather and their clothing and their silvery objects. The Stiffbeards all have very stiff hair and stiff beards, as their name implies, and they are made thus not from any natural quality of the hairs, which are invariably black or grey or white as they grow older, and changing colour much as it doth for us, Longbeards, but because they braid their hair into thick plaits, which they fill with whale oil. And I'll tell you what a whale is later. I know what a whale is, da. It's like a fish, only bigger. Yes, well, 'tis that and other things besides, but I'll tell you about it later. Anyway, the Stiffbeards' beards and hair are stiff on account of their braiding and the oil, as I said, and also because of their terrible cold, the cold in their homeland. When it's unbraided, sometimes rarely seen by outsiders, even by other dwarves, their hair is said to always be wavy and very thick. Though if the waves come from the braiding or appear naturally, I couldn't tell for certain, though I think it flows that way naturally, for though no Stiffbeard, like no other dwarf, would ever go willingly into a boat or ship to sail the sea, or even into a canoe the way their friends the Lossoth sometimes hunt and travel, it is said that they worship Wynn next to Aula only, and pray for her to calm the waves and not let them roll in over Frostholm, which is very near the greater sea, which surely would drown them all in icy water. Maybe Wynn started favouring them as her own of dwarven kind, especially after the fall of her people, the Númenóreans, in the Second Age, and so as a special mark of recognition gave them all that wavy hair. The skin of the Stiffbeards is tan because of all the sun they get from colourless and cloudless skies in summer, but white as snow for those who stay in their igloo smithies and never venture out.